The air hung over Milbrook, Alabama in October 2019 as work crews began on a new shopping center off Highway 14. Till it suddenly stopped, the rhythmic hammering of a jackhammer against red clay had become background noise to the little community. A workman's shovel had struck something strange beneath 3 feet of packed soil, its hinges corroded shut, a rusty metal toolbox wrapped in what seemed to be an ancient canvas tarp. Forensic experts would discover a collection of items inside. Consciously hidden for 46 years, a purse contained an Alabama driver's license, a name tag reading Deborah, manager, and a single high-heeled shoe smeared with dried blood. The name on the license, Deborah Lee Miller, 28 years old, had been reported missing on a steamy August night in 1973 from the parking lot of the 24-hour eatery she managed. Her case had been Milbrook's most disturbing mystery, a tale spoken through generations, a wound that never healed. Then investigators thought her arranged husband, her assistant manager, even drifters going by on Interstate 65. But devoid of a body, without witnesses, devoid of answers. Within months, the investigation went cold. Deborah's aged mother left her bedroom unchanged for 3 decades, waiting. And then the revelation beneath Highway 14 altered everything. More than relics were in that toolkit. It also contained DNA evidence that would eventually speak Deborah's name after nearly half a century of silence. Before we carry on this terrible account, your support helps to bring forgotten narratives to light, and the algorithm gods will see to it you do not miss any future postings. October 2019. The Alabama sun sank low and orange over Milbrook, casting long shadows across Highway 14 where building crews had been laboring for 3 weeks. The air was thick and humid, with a diesel fuel smell and red clay. Bulldozers murmured in rhythmic order, their metal teeth gnawing into earth untouched for decades. The initiative was typical. Forgotten by most, a new shopping center will take the place of the forsaken lot where an ancient restaurant once stood, torn down years ago. A Tuesday morning, the jackhammer operator, a man called Carlos Reyes, signaled for the equipment to cease. Under the tightly packed earth, he had experienced something strange, not rock nor root, but some metal that caused the gear to shut. He summoned the site foreman, a graying man in a hard hat who had managed building in Milbrook for 30 years. Together they knelt in the red dirt and brushed away layers of clay with gloved hands. 3 feet beneath the surface, wrapped in what appeared to be a decaying canvas tarp, rested a rusted metal toolbox. The foreman's first impulse was to pry it open, but something in the way the tarp clung to the metal and the careful depth of its burial made him stop. He stood, retrieved his phone from his pocket, and called the Milbrook Police Department. Within 20 minutes, yellow tape surrounded the region. Investigators from the Elmore County Sheriff's Office arrived hours later, followed by Montgomery's forensic team. The toolbox was gently removed, photographed from all directions, and sealed in an evidence bag for transport to the State Crime Laboratory. The contents made the room fall silent as experts at last cut through the rusted lock. Its brown leather surface patterned with age and moisture, a woman's handbag lay inside. From a plastic sleeve, a driver's license fell. Though fading, the picture was still clear. A young woman with dark hair and a tentative smile. Deborah Lee Miller's date of birth was March 14, 1945. Her address was 408 Pine Street, Milbrook, Alabama. Beside the purse was a plastic name tag, the sort clipped to a uniform. It read simply, Deborah, manager. Wrapped in a separate length of canvas at the bottom of the toolbox was a single high-heeled shoe. White leather, size 7. The toe stained dark with what forensic analysts would subsequently verify as human blood. Standing over the evidence table, lead investigator Detective Raymond Cole, a man in his mid-50s who had worked his whole career in Elmore County, felt a chill go over him despite the lab's warm air. He had heard Deborah Lee Miller's name previously from tales, the kind older officers whispered in break rooms, the kind that became local legend, not from case files he had handled. A woman who vanished from a diner parking area in 1973. No body, no witnesses, no answers. Just gone. Cole phoned the county records office and demanded the original missing persons report. It arrived later in the afternoon in a thin manila file with aged pages. The report was concise and clinical in its disinterest. August 12, 1973. Deborah Lee Miller, 28 years old, white woman, brown hair, brown eyes, 5'4", approximately 120 pounds, last seen leaving Miller's Diner on Highway 14 at about 2:30 a.m. Vehicle found in parking lot, keys and ignition, purse gone. No signs of, no suspects in custody, struggle. Attached to the report was a single black and white photograph of Deborah standing in front of the diner, arms crossed, apron wrapped at her waist, squinting slightly in the sun. She had seen hardship, but refused to break. The type of face. Cole examined the photo for a lengthy time before moving toward the evidence table where her name tag sat beneath a plastic sheet. 46 years separated the two photographs. 46 years of silence. News of the discovery spreading swiftly across Milbrook, a hamlet of barely 8,000 people where everyone knew everyone. Secrets have a way of surfacing in coffee shops and church pews. By evening, local news vans parked outside the building site, cameras directed toward the cordoned area of Earth. Reporters spoke into microphones, recounting Deborah Lee Miller's story, a young diner manager who disappeared on a summer evening, leaving behind a 6-year-old daughter and a mother who never stopped looking.
At a little home on the border of town, an elderly lady, Ruth Calloway, sat in her living room, television on, hands trembling as the show featured the Toolbox being packed onto a police van. Having collaborated with Deborah at the restaurant in 1973, Ruth had bid goodbye to her that last evening after had closed with her several times. She recalled Deborah's laughter and the way she hummed as she cleaned down tables. Kept tucked in her apron pocket the picture of her small girl. Ruth extended for the phone and rang the sheriff's office. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Deborah was known to me. I was there that evening. Should you want to talk to somebody? I am still here." A woman named Jennifer Harris, 52 years old, school counselor, divorced mother of 2, sat frozen in front of her laptop, reading the news article her coworker had sent across town in a small apartment in Montgomery. She hardly ever discussed Milbrook. She rarely talked about her childhood. But the photograph on the screen, Deborah Lee Miller, standing in front of the diner, was a face she had spent a lifetime attempting to remember. It was her mother's face. Jennifer had not returned to Milbrook for more than 10 years. Her mother had disappeared when she was 6 years old. She had grown tired of the small town and the difficult life and opted to vanishing, believing the alternative was harder. But Jennifer sensed something split open in her chest as she looked at the words human blood and buried proof. Her mother was still gone. Taken was her mother. Someone had hidden the evidence. Forensic experts toiled throughout the night at the crime laboratory. The blood found on the shoe was extracted and uploaded into the National CODIS database. The purse's hair fibers were examined. Geological maps of Milbrook were contrasted with soil samples gathered from the Toolbox. Every minute was recorded, shot, saved. Detective Cole sat in the observation room, viewing through the glass as workers maneuvered with accuracy. He knew this case would not be simple. 46 years was a lifetime. Witnesses had died, memories had faded, evidence had deteriorated. But the Toolbox had been purposefully buried. Someone had taken the time to dig, to hide, to cover. And that meant someone had known exactly what they were doing. That meant someone in Milbrook had carried this secret for nearly half a century, had walked by the diner site, driven along Highway 14, lived a normal life while Deborah Lee Miller's name disappeared into legend. Cole rested back in his chair, eyes glued on the shoe under the bright fluorescent light in the lab. He conjured the picture, Deborah in the sun with arms crossed and eyelids squinting, from the file. He considered her daughter, now a grown woman, 40 meters distant, and he considered the question that had plagued Milbrook since 1973. What became of Deborah Lee Miller? The ground had responded at last, after 46 years. Milbrook, Alabama, sat silent beneath the weight of southern heat, the kind that caused asphalt to sparkle, and air conditioners hummed all night. The town was tiny, barely a pinpoint on the map between Montgomery and Prattville, a place where everyone knew your name and your business before you did. Main Street included a hardware store, a barber shop, a Baptist church with white pillars, and Miller's Diner, a low brick at the edge of town along Highway 14. Advertising 24-hour breakfast and the best pecan pie in Elmore County, Deborah Lee Miller had been managing the restaurant for 2 years by the summer of 1973, building with a neon sign that pulsed red and blue. She was 28 years old, dark-haired, with a face that reflected weariness and warmth in equal measure. Those who knew her said a woman who laughed easily but rarely spoke about herself, worked double shifts without complaint, and always recalled how customers drank their coffee. She had grown up in Milbrook, graduated from the neighborhood high school in 1963, married young to Michael Miller, and had Jennifer, a daughter, at 22. The marriage ended in divorce. By 1971, Deborah had filed for divorce claiming irreconcilable differences, a polite phrase disguising years of arguments, financial burden, and a husband whose temper changed violent after too many drinks. Deborah stayed. She had a daughter to raise. Michael left Milbrook quickly, south toward Mobile. But Deborah stayed. She had a mother who needed her, a village that was home for all its defects. At precisely the correct time, the diner employment arrived. Knowing Deborah's family for years, the owner, an elder man called Earl Watkins, provided her the management post after the prior one quit without notice. Though the pay wasn't much, it was consistent, and Earl let her work the nighttime shift, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., so she may be at home with Jennifer during the day. Margaret, Deborah's mother, watched the youngster at night. The agreement, though weak yet practical, the way so many single mothers' lives were sown in tiny southern communities. Ruth Calloway, who worked the night shift alongside Deborah as a waitress, recalled those months vividly, even years later. Deborah was the kind of person who kept everything going smooth, Ruth said, in a 2019 interview with investigators. She'd handle the register, manage inventory, deal with drunk truckers at 2 in the morning without flinching. But you could see it wore on her.
She was tired all the minute. She said she aspired to return to school, perhaps acquire a nursing degree, so improving Jenny's life. She had schedules. Milbrook's nocturnal life centered in the diner itself. Truckers bearing goods along I-65 paused for coffee and eggs. Following their graveyard shift, textile mill employees from Prattville arrived at the factory. Teenagers covertly went out on weekends to sit in vinyl booths and light cigarettes they weren't supposed to. And then came the regulars, males such as Travis Holcomb. Travis was 31 in 1973, tall and thin with sandy hair and a quiet demeanor. He had been employed as assistant manager 6 months before Deborah. Though he formally worked the day shift, he frequently stayed late helping close, lingering in the kitchen long after the last consumer departed. He was courteous, efficient, and never caused problems. Earl trusted him. Deborah tolerated him. But Ruth saw things others missed. Travis watched Deborah, she said softly, selecting her words. Not in an apparent way, but I would catch him staring. She was professional and kept her distance, but I could detect it troubled her. Ruth saw a fight between them in the back room of the diner 2 weeks before Deborah's vanishing in late July 1973. She had been replenishing napkins when she heard shouts. Travis was persuading Deborah to go out with him, emphasizing they would be perfect together and urging she not be alone. Deborah's reaction was strong. I'm not interested, Travis. I need to sort out my life and my daughter. I don't want difficulty. Travis stood there for a long time, tight-jawed, then left without another word. Deborah was never spoken to for the rest of the week. Earl Watkins, the proprietor of the diner, never observed the stress. Travis was a good employee, he reported to police in 1973. He kept to himself. I never had any difficulties with him. When authorities questioned Travis had exhibited, Earl shrugged. Half the men in town were interested in Deborah. She was a pretty woman, but she did not give anyone the time of day. She was focused on her kid. Deborah's daughter Jennifer, 6 years old that summer, was a small girl with her mother's dark hair and a smile that lit up every photograph.
Deborah kept a picture of her in her apron pocket, wrinkled from being pulled out, and gazed at throughout slow shifts. Coworkers recalled Deborah chatting about Jennifer. Deborah's mother, Margaret Miller, a widower living alone in a modest home on Pine Street, the same one Deborah had grown up in, Margaret, "You need to rest," Margaret would tell Deborah. "You're going to work yourself to death." Deborah would smile and kiss her mother's cheek. "I'm fine, Mama. Just a little while longer. Once I save enough, things will get easier." But by August, things weren't easier. The diner had been slow. Tips were down. Deborah's eyes had started to look hollow from exhaustion. Concerned incessantly about her daughter, Margaret worried about the long hours, the lonely nights. She couldn't pay for fresh brakes on the 1968 Chevrolet Impala she had purchased used. She had begun taking additional shifts, arriving early, remaining late, attempting to stretch every cent. Ruth observed the tension Deborah's shoulders held the same way she massaged her temples during pauses. Ruth inquired one evening, "You okay?" Deborah nodded her head, but her smile didn't look genuine. She was just worn out. "I'll be okay," she said. It was Friday night, August 11th, 1973. The diner was more crowded than it usually was. There were truckers for the weekend, some teens celebrating a birthday, and a few factory employees. Deborah worked her shift skillfully, refilling coffee cups, handling the cash register, and overseeing Travis, who had stayed late again to help with stock. Ruth was on the floor, balancing plates, chatting with customers, and keeping track of the time. By 2 a.m., the last customer had left the diner. At 2:30 a.m., the kitchen was all clean, the floors were mopped, and the register was tallied. Ruth clocked out first, waving goodbye as she walked towards her car, parked under the diner's only streetlight. Deborah was standing at the doorway with her keys, watching Ruth drive off. Travis was still inside, finishing something in the back. Deborah called to him, "I'm locking up now. You should go." He came out of the kitchen, drying his hands with a towel. "I'll walk you to your car," he offered. Deborah responded, "I'm okay. Just go home, Travis." She locked the door behind her and walked across the gravel lot to her blue Impala. The night in August was sticky, with cicadas buzzing in the trees. The highway was dark and empty both ways. Deborah unlocked her car, tossed her purse into the passenger seat, and got into the driver's seat. When she turned the key, the engine sputtered to life. That was the last time anyone saw Deborah Lee Miller alive. By morning, her mother would be calling the police. By lunchtime, her car would be found in the same parking lot, the driver's door slightly open, keys still in the ignition, and her purse missing. By evening, the people in Milbrook would start to realize something awful had happened. Travis Holcomb would tell the police that he went straight home after Deborah locked up the diner, and that he didn't see or hear anything unusual. But many years later, the blood on a white high-heeled shoe hidden under Highway 14 would tell another story.
On August 12, 1973, the clock in the diner showed 2:47 a.m. when Deborah Lee Miller locked the front door for the last time. The sound of the lock clicking echoed in the empty parking lot, quickly absorbed by the humid night in Alabama. She checked the handle 2 times, a habit she picked up from Earl always reminding her to be careful, then walked toward her car. The blue Impala was parked alone under the single streetlight, its shiny bumper reflecting the yellow light. The gravel made crunching sounds under her white heels as she walked across the parking lot. With her purse held tightly under one arm, she started to look for her car keys with the other hand. The road ahead was dark and quiet in both directions. There were no headlights or trucks driving by, just the constant noise of cicadas and a dog barking somewhere in the pine trees near the diner. Even though it was late, the heat was still uncomfortable. Deborah's uniform stuck to her back, sweaty from hours spent between the hot grill and the not-so-cool dining area. She just wanted to get home, check on Jennifer, who was sleeping at her mother's house, and fall into bed for a little rest before the sun came up again. She unlocked the driver's door of the Impala and slid into the vinyl seat. The seat was still warm from the day, and the inside smelled of old coffee mixed with the vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. She tossed her purse onto the passenger seat, put the key in the ignition, and turned it. The engine made a few sputtering noises, then started. The lights on the dashboard lit up.
Deborah adjusted the mirror and caught a glimpse of her tired face for a moment, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the faded lipstick, and her hair slipping out of its ponytail. She put the car in reverse, her hand on the gear shift and her foot hovering over the gas pedal. But then she paused. Later, investigators would try to figure out what happened in those few minutes. They would talk to everyone who was at the diner that night, track every movement, and analyze every timeline. But the truth was, no one saw what happened next, except for Deborah and maybe one other person. At 3:17 a.m., a truck driver named James Woodard passed by Miller's diner while heading north on Highway 14. 2 days later, he would report to authorities that the blue Impala was still parked in the lot, angled weirdly near the edge of the gravel, headlights off. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Perhaps the manager was doing paperwork. Possibly the car wouldn't start. It was not his concern. He kept driving, carrying a shipment of textiles to Birmingham. By the time he heard about the missing lady on the radio 3 days later, his recollections of that event had already begun to fade. What Woodard missed, what no one saw, was a dark sedan, perhaps a Ford, hidden in shadows beyond the reach of the streetlight, was parked at the far end of the lot, close to the tree line. Several witnesses would afterward remark that they'd spotted an odd vehicle in that location over the previous weeks, but no one could agree on the make, model, or color. One adolescent felt it was black. A plant worker argued it was dark green. A waitress from the daytime reported she had seen it twice, always positioned in the same manner. Empty. Travis Holcomb lived in a modest rented house off County Road 40, 3 miles from the eatery. He stated precisely and calmly during police questioning on August 14th, 48 hours after Deborah was reported missing, that he had left the restaurant at 2:35 a.m., 5 minutes after Deborah locked the door. He said he drove straight home, arriving around 2:50 a.m. and gone to bed. He lived alone. Though no one could verify his narrative, neither could they discredit it. "Did you see anyone else in the parking lot?" the inquiring officer asked. "No, sir, just Deborah going to her car." "Did you offer to wait with her, make sure she got off okay?" Travis shook his head. "She told me to go home. She didn't want me hanging around. Deborah was independent like that, didn't like people fussing over her." "Did she seem worried about anything? Mention anyone bothering her?" "No, sir. She looked normal. Tired, but typical." The officer made notes, nodded, and moved on to further inquiries. Travis, 3 days later, passed a polygraph test. The examiner pointed out that his physiological reactions indicated no deception. He was ruled out as a suspect and never seriously questioned again. Margaret Miller woke at 6:15 a.m. on August 12th to discover her granddaughter still asleep in the guest room and no sign of her daughter. This wasn't unique. Sometimes Deborah dropped by the all-night grocery in Prattville on her way home, or sat in her car for a few minutes unwinding before coming inside. But by 7:30 a.m., Deborah still hadn't. Margaret arrived and felt the first flutter of anxiety in her breast. She called the eatery. No response. She called Deborah's apartment on Pine Street. No response. By 7:30 a.m., she stood on her front porch, hands trembling, gazing down the desolate street. Jennifer had woken, asking for her mother. Margaret had no response. She dialed the Milbrook Police Department at 8 a.m. Officer Denny Wright, 26 years old, new to the force, answered. Missing persons cases weren't prevalent in Milbrook.
He first headed toward the restaurant. Procedure for any report involving a possible workplace accident. The parking lot was abandoned save for a blue 1968 Chevrolet Impala, Alabama plates, registered to Deborah Lee Miller. Wright cautiously approached the vehicle, hand next to his service pistol, even if he did not know why. The driver's side door was not fully closed, a little ajar. The keys were hanging from the ignition. Though he did not understand why, Wright slowly approached the car with his hand near to his service weapon warm. He peered through the window. The interior appeared untouched. There was no evidence of struggle, no blood, no torn cloth,
but the passenger seat was empty. The purse Margaret had described, brown leather with a long strap, was gone. Wright called for backup. The parking lot was taped off within an hour. Investigators from the Elmore County Sheriff's Office arrived at noon. They dusted the car for fingerprints, shot every inch of the outside and internal, examined the neighborhood for tire tracks or footprints. Gravel posed problems. Every day, tens of cars drove across the lot, leaving overlapping traces that were difficult to separate. But close to the tree line, where the black sedan was claimed to have been parked, police came across something. One pair of tire tracks pressed deeply into the soft dirt, as though a vehicle had rapidly accelerated, wheels spinning before lurching back onto the gravel. Plaster castings were created, but the tracks pointed toward a service route that linked to Highway 14, half a mile south. Without a suspect vehicle to compare them to, the evidence meant nothing. Investigators questioned Earl Watkins inside the eatery and retrieved receipts from the prior night. Everything looked normal. The register balanced, the kitchen was clean. No indication of forced entry, no indication that anything strange had happened within the building. Still shaking, Ruth Calloway described her last talk with Deborah. "She was fine when I left, tired but fine." Travis remained within. She told him to depart, told him she was locking up. "That's all I know." By late afternoon, search teams were combing the woods behind the diner, wading through dense underbrush and climbing over fallen logs slick with moss. Bloodhounds were brought in, given Deborah's scent from a uniform kept at her apartment. The dogs tracked from the Impala to the edge of the tree line, then lost the trail at the spot where the tire tracks had been found. It was as if Deborah had simply vanished into the air. Margaret shook her head. She kept to herself. She worked, she came home, she took care of Jenny. That's all. The officer hesitated. "What about her ex-husband?" "Michael Miller." Margaret's face hardened. "Michael left town 2 years ago. I don't know where he is, but if he's involved, you find him." 3 days later, police found Michael Miller in Mobile, working at a shipyard. He possessed an alibi. Several colleagues verified his presence on shift the evening Deborah vanished, at 10 o'clock, not departing until 6 a.m. He concurred on come Milbrook for questioning, and when the investigators noticed the real surprise on his face while they talked about what happened, they realized he wasn't the one they were looking for. Michael had many issues. He struggled with drinking, he was a bad husband, but he wasn't a murderer. During the questioning, he fell apart, with his head in his hands, crying, "I should have treated her better. I should have stayed with her." As August turned into September, the investigation hit a dead end. The news about it spread in the area. A woman from Milbrook disappears after her night job. But without a body, no witnesses, and no clear suspect, the case began to lose attention. People kept searching the woods, combing through ponds and looking in empty buildings. Margaret lit candles at the Baptist church every Sunday, standing in front of the crowd with Jennifer next to her, pleading with anyone who knew something to come forward. But Milbrook offered no solutions, only questions that floated in the warm air like spirits. Where was Deborah? What happened in those moments after locking up the diner and leaving? And who was lurking in the dark where the streetlights could not shine? The blue Impala was taken to a towing lot, where it would stay for 6 months before being given back to Margaret. She couldn't stand to see it and sold it to a junkyard for $50. The diner stayed shut for a week out of respect, then opened again. Life carried on like it always does, even when the truth stays hidden. But somewhere under the red dirt of Highway 14, buried 3 feet down in a toolbox, the answers waited quietly. By September 1973, the Milbrook police talked to over 60 people. The file for Deborah Lee Miller kept getting thicker every day. Witness statements, lie detector test results, crime scene pictures, maps of the search areas. But the truth stayed hard to find. It was lost among confusing stories and leads that led nowhere. The detectives worked long hours, 16 hours a day, fueled by coffee and the pressure from the community wanting answers. In a town with 8,000 residents, where everyone was familiar with each other, distrust spread quickly, making it hard to trust anyone.
Michael Miller was the main suspect for the first 2 weeks, even though he had a strong alibi. Domestic situations often pointed to the ex-husband first, and Michael's past outbursts during their marriage made him a clear suspect. Detectives looked into his background in Mobile, talking to his landlord, co-workers, and his girlfriend, a woman he started seeing 3 months after the divorce. They collected phone records, bank statements, and credit card bills. Everything supported what Michael had already told them. He was not in Milbrook on August 12th. He wanted to help out, Detective Charles Brennan noted in his report after the third meeting. He cried and showed feelings of guilt, but there was no proof linking him to the crime scene. Unless he hired someone to do it, which seems unlikely due to his money problems, Michael Miller is not our suspect. The focus turned to Travis Holcomb. Ruth Calloway's comments about the argument in the diner's back office raised concerns, and several co-workers mentioned they noticed Travis staring at Deborah for too long. On September 8th, Travis came in for his second official interview. He sat across from Detective Brennan and Sheriff Tom Hastings in a small room with concrete walls and a single flickering fluorescent light. "Travis, we need you to explain what happened that night again," Brennan said, ready to write in his notebook. "Every little detail, even if it seems small." Travis nodded and looked relaxed, with his hands resting on the table. "I've already told you everything. I finished taking stock around 2:30. Deborah asked me to leave. I left, drove home, and then went to bed." "Did you notice anyone else in the parking lot?" "No, sir." "Did you see any other cars?" "Just Deborah's Impala and my truck." "You didn't stick around to see if she got in her car?" "Right." Travis tightened his jaw a bit. "She didn't want me to wait. She made that clear. Deborah wasn't a fan of people standing around." Sheriff Hastings leaned in. "Ruth Calloway says you asked Deborah out a couple of weeks before she went missing." "She said no. Is that true?" For the first time, something changed in Travis's expression. Maybe annoyance or embarrassment. "I asked her to dinner. She turned me down. That's all." "It was not a big issue? Are you upset about it?" "No, sir. Maybe a little disappointed, but not angry. I respected her choice." "Did you ever go to her apartment, her mom's house?" "No. Why would I do that?" The questioning went on for 2 hours. Travis's answers were steady, and he stayed calm. When they offered him a lie detector test, he agreed right away. 2 days later, he found himself in a hot room in Montgomery, while a technician put sensors on his chest, fingers, and head. The questions were straightforward. "Did you hurt Deborah Lee Miller?" "No." "Do you know what happened to Deborah Lee Miller?" "No." "Were you part of Deborah Lee Miller's disappearance?" "No." The polygraph operator looked over the results and gave his finding. No signs of lying showed that Travis Holcomb was being honest, or at least his body thought so. The science behind lie detectors in 1973 was not perfect, but it was the best tool investigators could use. Travis was let go, but told to stay in town. The town watched him go back to work at the diner, and rumors spread. Without proof, the police couldn't do much. They then focused on regular customers at the diner. A man named Clayton Foster, a truck driver who visited Miller's diner a few times each week, was seen chatting with Deborah a lot. Some people said he flirted with her, while others thought he made her uncomfortable. When the investigators found him at a truck stop in Georgia, Clayton looked genuinely puzzled. "Sure, I knew Deborah. She was a nice lady and did her job well, but I didn't know her outside of the diner. I'd come in, eat, leave a tip, and then drive away. That's all." "Did you ever ask her out?" Clayton shrugged. "Maybe once, jokingly. She laughed and said she didn't date customers. I dropped it. I'm married, for heaven's sake. My wife's name is Linda. You can call her if you want." They did. Linda confirmed that Clayton was at home asleep beside her on the night of August 11th. Another dead end.
A local mechanic named Barry Stokes came under suspicion when someone said he worked on Deborah's Impala a month before she vanished and had told a friend that Deborah was really pretty. The police brought him in for questioning. Barry was 42, single, and lived alone in a trailer along Route 9. He admitted he thought Deborah was attractive, but claimed he had never acted on it. "I repaired her brakes. She gave me money for it. That was all there was to it. I didn't track her afterward. I didn't do anything else to her. Seriously, I've been living in this town my entire life. Do you really think I'd do something like that?" Barry took a lie detector test. That's in the past. Another person's name was removed from the list. Then there was the odd, dark car. Police officers went around Milbrook and nearby towns asking if anyone recognized a car that fit a very general description. It was dark, maybe a Ford, and could have been black or green. Many cars matched that description. The police looked at registrations, talked to car owners, and checked the vehicles for anything suspicious. They found nothing. The dark sedan became a mystery, a ghost that may or may not have been real and might or might not have had anything to do with Deborah's missing case. By October, the search efforts had lessened.
The groups of volunteers that used to be in the hundreds shrank to just a few committed locals who spent their weekends searching the same forests and roads, hoping to uncover something everyone else missed. Bloodhounds were brought back multiple times, but the scent trail always ended at the trees behind the diner. It felt like Deborah had been taken away without a trace. Margaret Miller didn't want to give up. She appeared on local TV, looking worn and pale, holding a picture of her daughter. "Please," she pleaded, her voice trembling, "if you know anything, even a tiny bit, please come forward. My granddaughter asks me every day where her mom is. I don't know what to say to her anymore." The broadcast went out across Alabama, leading to a surge of calls to the police tip line. Most of the calls were from good-hearted people, but weren't helpful. There were psychics saying they had special insights, conspiracy theorists proposing that Deborah had been taken by a cult, and even people far away who thought they spotted her in a store or gas station. Every tip was investigated, but none led anywhere. Detective Brennan was in his office late one November night with the case file spread out on his desk. He lit a cigarette, breathed out slowly, and looked at the picture of Deborah in front of the diner. He had been a detective for 12 years and had dealt with murders, assaults, and robberies, but this case caught his attention like no other had. There was no body found, no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no one confessed. All that was left was a woman who had locked a door, walked to her car, and disappeared. "We're missing something," he said quietly to himself. "It's something obvious." But whatever it was, it stayed hidden under the red clay, just waiting. By December 1973, the Milbrook Police Department officially labeled the case as cold. The file was closed and kept in storage, marked as unsolved. A short piece appeared in the local newspaper. The Deborah Miller case remains a mystery, no new clues. The town read it while drinking their morning coffee and then moved on. Christmas decorations went up along Main Street. The diner stayed open. Everything continued as usual. Life went on without caring about the questions that remained unanswered. Margaret kept Deborah's room just as it was, her clothes still in the closet, books on the nightstand, and a hairbrush with some dark hair still in it. She lit a candle every Sunday at church and prayed for a miracle. Jennifer became quieter and more withdrawn, a little girl learning to cope without her mother, understanding that some questions don't have answers. 3 miles away, Travis Holcomb settled back into his normal routine. He worked at the diner. He went home. He slept. He woke up. And then he did it all over again. Neighbors saw him at the hardware store, the post office, and at Sunday services. He was polite, plain, and easy to forget. No one suspected anything. No one knew.
46 years would go by before the earth finally revealed the truth that Travis Holcomb had kept hidden in the dark. 46 years before a construction crew's shovel hit metal underneath Highway 14 and brought secrets into the light. 46 years before the blood on a white high-heeled shoe revealed the name of the man who had always been there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for justice to be forgotten. But justice, just like the red Alabama clay, has a very good memory. The years in Milbrook passed slowly, and with each one, the weight of silence around Deborah Lee Miller's name grew heavier. By 1980, her case became a local story, one that people shared in soft voices during sleepovers or while having drinks at the VFW hall. The diner on Highway 14 was still there, with its neon lights flickering in red and blue. However, the parking lot felt emptier now, haunted by the absence of a woman who had mysteriously disappeared one August night. Margaret Miller aged quickly during those years. The Sunday vigils she held at the Baptist church started with many people, but eventually shrank to just a few loyal friends who lit candles out of loyalty rather than hope. By 1985, Margaret's health began to decline. She struggled with diabetes and high blood pressure, and her heart grew weaker from years of sadness. She moved slowly, and her hands shook as she cleaned Deborah's unused bedroom, adjusting the same pillow she had fixed countless times before. Jennifer was now a teenager and had stopped asking about her mom. The silence that filled the space between her and her grandmother was heavy with unspoken feelings. In 1990, Margaret had a stroke. She survived but never fully got better. Her speech was unclear and her left side felt weak. By then, Jennifer was 23 and working as a receptionist in Montgomery. She visited her grandmother on weekends to help with groceries and medicine. They would sit together on the porch where Deborah used to shell peas, and sometimes Margaret held Jennifer's hand tightly as if she feared her granddaughter might vanish too. Margaret Miller passed away in her sleep on March 8, 2003, exactly 30 years after her daughter went missing. The funeral was small, with just a few dozen people, mostly older folks at the same church where Margaret had prayed every Sunday for 30 years. Jennifer stood at the gravesite in a black dress, dry-eyed, watching as the casket was lowered into the red dirt of Alabama. She had cried all her tears long ago. Now she felt only numbness, a deep ache that was so familiar it seemed like a part of her. After the funeral, Jennifer went back to her grandmother's house one last time. She moved through the rooms slowly, touching the furniture, the pictures on the walls, and the little statues on the shelf. Then she opened the door to her mother's bedroom.
It looked just like it had back in 1973. The same bed cover, the same curtains, and the same hairbrush sitting on the dresser. Jennifer lingered in the doorway for a long time before she quietly shut the door. She couldn't make herself go inside. Some rooms feel like graves, and walking into them seems disrespectful. 2 months later, she sold the house to a young couple from Prattville who had no idea about its past, and Jennifer didn't tell them anything. The for sale sign was taken down, ending the Miller family's link to Milbrook. Jennifer went back to Montgomery and tried to create a life that didn't revolve around loss. She got married for a short time in her 30s, got divorced, and had no kids. She worked, paid her bills, went to church now and then, and stayed away from Milbrook as if the town was cursed. Meanwhile, the diner on Highway 14 was slowly falling apart. Earl Watkins, who owned it, passed away in 1995. His son attempted to keep it going, but couldn't compete with the new fast food places popping up along the interstate. By 1998, Miller's Diner shut down for good. The building was empty for many years, with broken windows, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot, and the neon sign dark and rusty. In 2004, the county purchased the land with plans to tear it down and widen the highway. Travis Holcomb, who was now in his 60s, had long since left the diner. After Deborah went missing, he stayed for 2 more years before quietly quitting due to stress.
He found a job at a feed store in Prattville, which didn't require much interaction with people. He just stocked shelves and took care of inventory. He bought a small house on the edge of town, lived alone, and kept to himself. Neighbors said he was nice, but not very friendly, the kind of person you'd nod at in the grocery store, but wouldn't invite over for dinner. For those who remembered the Deborah Miller case, Travis was just a small detail, a name that popped up now and then when older folks reminisced. Remember that assistant manager, they would ask? What was his name again? Travis something? Most people thought he had left town. Nobody realized he was still nearby, less than 40 miles from where Deborah had disappeared, living a simple life while keeping his secret hidden deep inside. But just like bodies, secrets have a way of coming to light. In October 2019, the Alabama Department of Transportation gave the green light for a project to make Highway 14 wider and create a new shopping center where Miller's Diner used to be. The old diner had been torn down long ago, leaving just a concrete slab and memories behind. Construction workers showed up in early October with bulldozers, diggers, and dump trucks. The plan was simple: clear the area, flatten the ground, and pour new foundations. Carlos Reyes, who operated a jackhammer, had been in construction for 15 years. He had broken through concrete, limestone, clay, and all kinds of dirt found in the South. But on October 15th, when his machine hit something metallic 3 feet underground, he immediately realized it was unusual. The vibrations felt off, and the noise was hollow. He turned off the jackhammer and called over the foreman. They carefully began digging with shovels instead of machines, removing layers of compacted red clay. The object was covered in canvas. The fabric was worn and stained, but still held its form. When they finally pulled it out, they discovered it was an old toolbox, rusty, the kind a mechanic might have used many years ago. The foreman's first thought was to open it up. Construction sites often uncovered old junk, forgotten tools, and bits of buildings that were no longer standing. But something about how deep it was buried and the canvas covering made him hesitate. He took out his phone and called the Milbrook Police Department. 20 minutes later, yellow tape was put around the area where they were digging. By noon, Detective Raymond Cole from the Elmore County Sheriff's Office was examining the toolbox, which was now in an evidence bag. Cole was 54 years old and had spent his career investigating everything from drug offenses to murders, but he was especially skilled in cold cases. He had solved 3 in the last 10 years using new DNA technology and forensic methods that weren't available when the crimes happened. The toolbox was moved to the crime lab in Montgomery. Workers took pictures of it from all sides before carefully breaking the rusted lock. When they opened the lid, everyone in the room became quiet. Inside, there was a woman's brown leather purse that looked wet and stained. A driver's license fell out of a plastic holder. It belonged to Deborah Lee Miller, birth date 3/14/1945. Next to the purse was a name tag that said Deborah, manager. Also at the bottom, wrapped in canvas, was a single white high-heel shoe, and its toe had a dark brown stain on it. Early tests showed that the stain was blood. Detective Cole stood by the evidence table, looking at the items as if they could tell him something. He had heard about the Deborah Miller case, like every officer in Elmore County, but it had gone cold for 46 years, long before his career started. Now it was suddenly coming back to life, needing attention and justice. The forensic team worked very carefully. They took DNA from the blood on the shoe using methods that weren't available in 1973. The sample was small and damaged by time and moisture, but new technology could achieve amazing things even with tiny bits. The genetic profile was put into CODIS, the national DNA database, which holds millions of samples from people convicted of crimes, those arrested, and crime scenes across the nation. Cole understood the chances were slim. Finding DNA matches in old cases was uncommon. Most suspects from the 1970s had never faced serious charges, so their DNA had never been taken. The system had many gaps where guilty people escaped just because their genetic info wasn't recorded anywhere. But 3 days later, on October 21, 2019, Cole's phone rang.
It was the lab with news.
they found a match. The name displayed made Cole feel cold. It was Travis Eugene Holcomb, birth date 6/22/1942. Cole took out the original case file, which was old and fragile, from the archives. He located Travis's name and witness statements, polygraph tests, interviews, and found out he was the assistant manager. He was the guy who'd been cleared and had passed the polygraph test. He had lived quietly for 46 years while Deborah Lee Miller's family suffered without answers. "How did we get his DNA?" Cole asked the lab worker. He had been arrested in 2009 for an assault during a bar fight in Prattville. The charges were dropped, but his DNA had been taken and added to the system. A bar brawl, a flash of rage, a hit on another drunk customer, and then a night spent behind bars. That one poor choice led to Travis Holcomb's DNA being added to a system that wouldn't even start for another 36 years after Deborah vanished. Now, 10 years later, that DNA was linked to blood found on a shoe buried under Highway 14. Cole put together a group of experts, experienced detectives and lawyers. They looked at every bit of evidence, every witness statement, and every picture. They created a timeline that matched what Travis was doing in 1973 with the evidence found in 2019. The blood on the shoe didn't belong to Deborah, it belonged to Travis, which indicated that he had gotten hurt during whatever took place that night. There had been a fight or something violent enough to cause bleeding. They brought Ruth Calloway back for questioning, now 81 years old and living in a nursing home in Montgomery. Her memory was clear. "I always thought something was strange about Travis," she mentioned, her hands shaking as she held a cup of tea. "The way he stared at Deborah. The way he wouldn't leave her by herself. But he had passed the lie detector test and everyone moved on. I should have spoken up more. I should have insisted on finding out more." Cole placed his hand over hers. "This is not on you. We have him now." On November 3, 2019, Detective Cole called Jennifer Harris. At 52, she was living in Montgomery and working as a school counselor. She hadn't thought about her mother's case in a long time. It was too hard, a pain that never went away. When her phone rang and she saw Elmore County Sheriff on the screen, her heart dropped. "Miss Harris, this is Detective Raymond Cole. I'm calling about your mother, Deborah Lee Miller. We have some important news about her case. I need you to come to the station." Jennifer's hands were trembling so much she could hardly keep hold of the phone. "Did you find her?" "We found some evidence and have identified a suspect." The drive to Milbrook felt almost unreal. Jennifer hadn't been back in more than 10 years. The town seemed smaller, older, and worn down. When she entered the sheriff's office, Detective Cole greeted her with a serious look and led her to a private space. He explained everything that had happened, the building site, the tool bag, the DNA connection, and then he mentioned a guy named Travis Holcomb. Jennifer looked at him confused. "Who is that?" "He used to be the assistant manager at the diner. He worked with your mom. They questioned him back in 1973, but he was cleared." Jennifer slowly shook her head. "I don't remember him. I was only 6. The only person I remember from that time is my grandma." Cole showed her a picture from the first investigation. It was Travis from 1973. He looked young, thin, and ordinary. Jennifer examined the photo, hoping to recognize him, but she didn't remember anything. This man had taken her mom. This man had hidden the truth and lived freely for 46 years, and she had no memory of him at all. "We're going to arrest him tomorrow morning," Cole said softly. "I wanted you to be the first to know." Jennifer nodded, too shocked to say anything. After she finally left the police station, she sat in her car in the lot for an hour, staring off into space and feeling a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, relief. After all these years, her mother's voice was finally going to be acknowledged, and the man who silenced her would face justice for what he did. On November 4, 2019, the sky over Prattville was still dark as a line of police cars turned onto County Road 40.
Their headlights sliced through the fog that hung around the Alabama pine trees. Detective Raymond Cole was in the front car with his jaw tight and his eyes focused on the little house at the end of the dirt driveway. He hadn't gotten much sleep. For the last week, he had been immersed in the Deborah Miller case, reading all the statements, looking at every picture, and imagining that August night in 1973 when a young woman locked the diner door and walked to her car for the last time. Now, 46 years later, it was finally time to bring justice to the man who had taken her. Travis Eugene Holcomb had a simple home. It was a one-story brick house with faded white trim and a porch that was sagging. A rusty pickup truck sat in the driveway, and a soft light could be seen behind the kitchen curtains. The area was quiet, the type of neighborhood where people kept to themselves and didn't ask many questions. Neighbors would later say that Travis was polite, but kept to himself, that he maintained his lawn and took care of his trash cans, and that he never caused any trouble. At 5:47 a.m., Cole gave the go-ahead. Officers surrounded the house, making sure no one could leave. 2 deputies walked to the front door while others stayed at the sides and back.
Cole walked to the porch with his hand on his gun and knocked loudly. "Travis Holcomb, this is the Elmore County Sheriff's Office. Open the door." Silence followed. Then slow footsteps could be heard from inside. The door opened a little, and Travis showed up, wearing wrinkled pajama pants and an old t-shirt. He was now 77 years old. His hair was white and thin, and his face had many wrinkles. He looked at the officers with confusion that quickly changed to something else, maybe understanding or giving up. "Travis Eugene Holcomb," Cole said, speaking clearly and firmly. "You are under arrest for killing Deborah Lee Miller." For a moment, Travis didn't move. His pale blue eyes moved from Cole to the officers behind him and to the red and blue flashing lights outside. Then he nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time and knew it would eventually happen. "I need to get dressed," he said softly. "You can do that at the station. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Travis did what he was told without fighting back. The handcuffs snapped shut, and he was taken down the porch steps, passing neighbors who came out in robes and slippers, looking shocked. Mrs. Dawson, who lived 2 houses away, held her chest. "Travis, what happened?" she asked. No one replied. The line of police cars drove away, leaving the small house empty and the neighborhood buzzing with questions that would be talked about for weeks. At the Elmore County Detention Center, Travis was processed, his fingerprints taken, and his picture was snapped. He received an orange jumpsuit and was put in a holding cell. He sat on a metal bench with his hands in his lap, staring at the floor. When Detective Cole walked into the interrogation room hours later, Travis looked up with tired eyes. "Do you want a lawyer?" Cole asked, as the law requires. Travis paused for a moment and then shook his head. "I'll talk." Cole placed a recorder on the table and pressed the record button. November 4th, 2019, 10:23 a.m. Detective Raymond Cole interviewing Travis Eugene Holcomb about the murder of Deborah Lee Miller. He leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Now, tell me what happened, Travis." For a long time, Travis didn't say anything. Then he started talking, his voice soft and calm, like he was finally letting go of a heavy burden he had carried for almost 50 years. "I didn't mean to do it," he said. "I want you to understand that I didn't go to the diner that night thinking I would hurt her." Cole didn't say anything, allowing the quiet to draw out more of the story. "A few weeks earlier, I asked Deborah out. She refused. She said she wasn't interested. I thought maybe she would change her mind. I figured that if I gave her some space and was patient, she would realize I was a good guy. But that didn't happen. She kept her distance. When we were finishing up work that night, I tried again. I told her that I liked her and that we would be good as a couple." Travis paused for a moment, rubbing his hands together. "She got mad and told me to leave her alone, saying that she had already said no, and that should have been enough. She went to her car, and I followed her. I just wanted to have a conversation. I never meant to scare her, but she got inside her car and locked the door. I stood there, knocking on the window.
asking her to hear me out. She told me to go home. Then she started her car. His voice trembled. I don't know what happened to me. I was angry. I felt turned down and embarrassed. I grabbed the door handle and yanked it open before she could back out. She screamed. She tried to push me away. We struggled. I didn't want to hurt her, but I grabbed her by the arm and pulled her from the car. She fought back. She was strong. She hit me in the face and scratched my neck. I could feel blood trickling down my jaw. Cole's jaw clenched, but he kept his face calm. What occurred next? Travis shut his eyes. I hit her. I can't recall deciding to do that, but it just happened. I hit her. She fell and hit her head against the side of the car. There was blood. She wasn't moving. I freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I called for help, they would take me away. I thought my life was over. So you buried her? Travis nodded slowly. I put her in my truck and drove to a spot I knew, an old dirt road behind the diner. I buried her in the woods. I went back to the parking area and did my best to clean up the blood. I took her handbag and her bloody shoe and hid them away. I thought that if there was no body left, then they couldn't prove anything happened. For a long time, I was right about that. Cole leaned in closer. Where is she, Travis? Where did you put Deborah in the ground? Travis's face fell. I can't remember exactly. It was so long ago. The woods have changed since then. I tried to forget it all. I wanted to live as if it had never occurred. But it did happen, and you've been living free for 46 years while our family has been in pain. Travis looked up, tears rolling down his worn face. I know. I'm sorry. I think about her every single day. I see her face in my dreams. I knew this moment would eventually happen. The recording was taken, typed out, and sent to the district attorney. Travis Holcomb was officially charged with first-degree murder. Bail was not allowed. The news spread all over Alabama and then the whole country. A case that was cold for 46 years was finally solved. DNA evidence connected a man who had passed a lie detector test and lived without worry while his victim's family grieved. Jennifer Harris sat in her apartment in Montgomery, watching the news and feeling a mix of relief and anger. She saw Travis being brought into the courthouse in handcuffs, looking down, and she felt totally empty. This man had taken her mother away. This man had destroyed her childhood. And now at 77, he would finally face justice. But justice felt meaningless. It couldn't bring Deborah back. It couldn't give Jennifer the life she should have had. The day after the arrest, Detective Cole called Jennifer. "We need your help," he said kindly. "Travis says he doesn't remember exactly where he buried your mother, but we have an area to search based on what he described. We'd like to try to find her and bring her home." Jennifer said yes right away. "I want to be there when you do." The search started on November 10th, 2019.
In a thickly forested area half a mile behind where Miller's Diner used to be, they brought in cadaver dogs. Their guides led them through thick bushes and over fallen logs covered in moss. Ground-penetrating radar was used to search the ground for any unusual things that might show there was a burial site. On the third day, one of the dogs signaled near a group of old oak trees. The handler marked the area and started digging. Investigators worked carefully, using brushes and small tools to avoid harming anything they might discover. 6 feet down, they found something hard. Bones. A human skeleton was lying curled on its side, mostly decomposed but still in good shape. Forensic experts were called to help. They took pictures, noted everything down, and gently removed the remains. Back at the lab, dental records confirmed what most already knew. The skeleton was that of Deborah Lee Miller. She was 28 years old at the time of her death. Now, after 46 years, she was finally returning home. Jennifer stood at the edge of the digging site with Detective Cole beside her, gazing at the spot where her mother had rested for nearly 50 years. The trees around were tall and ancient, their roots likely tangled with Deborah's bones. Birds chirped in the branches above. Sunlight streamed through the leaves. It was a calm place, but that felt wrong in a way. Her mother's final resting spot shouldn't have been a hidden grave in the woods. She should have been buried next to her own mother in the Milbrook cemetery with a tombstone that had her name. "We'll ensure she has a proper burial," Cole spoke softly. "She deserves that." Jennifer nodded, unable to say anything. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. The trial for Travis Eugene Holcomb started on March 2, 2020, at the Elmore County Courthouse. The room was full. Reporters, local people, and family members of other unsolved cases viewed Deborah's story as a source of hope. Jennifer sat in the front row with her husband and two close friends. She wore a black dress and held a picture of her mother. It was the same one from 1973, showing Deborah in front of the diner with her arms crossed, squinting in the sunlight. The prosecution laid out its case step by step. They showed DNA evidence from blood found on a shoe. They also presented Travis's recorded confession. Forensic examination of Deborah's body revealed injuries to her head that matched being hit. Ruth Calloway, who is now weak but strong-willed, shared what she saw during the fight between Travis and Deborah. A construction worker testified about discovering the toolbox. Detective Cole explained the investigation process to the jury step by step. The defense claimed that Travis's confession was forced out of him, since he was an elderly man who felt pressured to admit to something he didn't do. However, the DNA evidence could not be challenged. Travis's blood was found on the shoe. Deborah's body was located in the woods just where he said it would be. The defense couldn't counter that evidence. Travis chose to testify despite his lawyer advising against it. He sat in the witness stand, his hands shaking, and said the same thing he told Detective Cole. "I did not intend to kill her. It was an accident. I was upset and made a terrible error. I've felt sorry about it every single day." The prosecutor, a clever woman named Catherine Simmons, walked towards him slowly. "Mr. Holcomb, you say it was an accident, but you buried Deborah. You covered up what happened. You went to her memorials. You stood with her family as they mourned and acted like you cared. Does that sound like you feel bad to you?" Travis's expression changed to one of sadness. "I was frightened. I was immature and terrified." "You were 26, old enough to understand what is right and wrong, old enough to ask for help. But you didn't do that. You allowed her family to hurt for 46 years. You made them wonder and hope. You took that away from them, not by accident, by your choice." Travis had no reply. The courtroom went quiet. The jury talked for less than 4 hours. When they came back, the leader stood up and announced the decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis Eugene Holcomb, guilty of first-degree murder." Jennifer closed her eyes and breathed out. It was finished. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. Travis received a life sentence without the chance for parole. At 77, it was pretty much a sentence to die in prison. He would pass away behind bars, which felt both fair and not enough. No punishment could erase 46 years of suffering. No prison time could bring Deborah back to her daughter. But it was something. It represented acknowledgement.
It was a form of truth. Deborah Lee Miller was buried on April 18, 2020, in a small service at Milbrook Cemetery. Her coffin was placed next to her mother's grave, which should have happened many years ago. The gravestone was plain, but beautiful. It read, "Deborah Lee Miller, born March 14, 1945. Died August 12, 1973. cherished daughter and mother, finally at rest. Jennifer was at the gravesite with a few people who had known her mother. There was Ruth Calloway in a wheelchair, some old colleagues, and a few distant relatives. Detective Cole was there too, keeping a respectful distance. The pastor talked about loss and healing and how justice may come late, but it still arrives. Once the service was finished, when the coffin was in the ground and those mourning had left, Jennifer chose to stay. She knelt next to the grave, touched the new soil, and spoke to the mother she hardly remembered. "I'm sorry it took so long, Mama. I'm sorry you were all alone, but you're home now, and he can't hurt you anymore." The sun was setting over Milbrook, casting long shadows over the cemetery. Jennifer remained until it was dark, sitting by her mother's grave and feeling the heaviness of 46 years finally easing from her heart. In the next few months, the Deborah Miller case became important. Cold case teams across the nation used it as an example of how DNA technology and determination could solve even the oldest cases. Families of missing people contacted Jennifer, asking how she handled it and survived. She replied as best as she could, trying to offer comfort, even though she understood the reality. You don't really get over losing someone like that. You just learn to live with it. Milbrook also changed. The shopping plaza was built as planned, but the builders put a small memorial plaque near the entrance to honor Deborah Lee Miller. 1945, 1973. May her story inspire us to pursue justice and never forget. Residents stopped to read it, with some remembering her and others discovering for the first time the story of the woman who had disappeared from that very place. Travis Holcomb passed away in prison on January 7, 2022, almost 2 years after being found guilty. He died from heart failure at the age of 79. There was no service held for him, and no one came to mourn. His body was cremated and his ashes were spread in a place that wasn't marked. When Jennifer heard about it, she didn't feel anything. His passing didn't bring her comfort. It simply ended a long chapter in her life. Detective Raymond Cole retired in 2023, ending his career on a high note with the resolution of the Deborah Miller case. During interviews, he consistently mentioned that this case showed him that the deceased never stopped communicating. We just need to be open to hear them. Jennifer Harris, now in her 50s, finally let herself think of her mother not as a ghost or a mystery, but as a real woman who worked hard, loved her daughter, and deserved more than what she received. Jennifer put a framed picture of Deborah in front of the diner on her wall in the living room. Sometimes she would sit down and gaze at it, examining her mother's face, trying to find pieces of her own identity in those features. The story of Deborah Lee Miller ended not with clear answers, but with recognition of her existence. The truth had finally come out. The ground had revealed its secrets. Although justice arrived 46 years late, it eventually came in Red Valley, Arizona. The Martinez family situation had taught the same important lesson about truth. In Milbrook, Alabama, the Miller family underlined it. Darkness can't keep the truth hidden forever. Time may go by, evidence may fade, and memories may blur, but the deceased don't forget. And we shouldn't either. Every unsolved case is not just a dusty file in a basement. It's a person who was important, a family that mourned, and a community that hasn't fully healed. When justice does come, even if it's late and doesn't seem perfect, it reminds us that some wrongs stay with us. Some crimes are never erased. And some voices, even if silenced for a long time, will eventually be heard. Deborah Lee Miller's voice was quiet for 46 years, but in the end, it was louder than anything Travis Holcomb could have predicted. In Milbrook, Alabama, a little town that had learned to cope with its memories, peace was finally achieved through the truth.
The porch light that Margaret Miller kept on for 30 years has been turned off for a while. Yet in the heart of a daughter who constantly wonders about her mother, in the hard work of a detective who won't give in, and in the technology that uncovered clues from blood on an old shoe, the light continues to shine, and it always will. Don't forget to subscribe, click the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves true crime stories. Your help shines a light on cases that might be overlooked. Which unsolved case do you think needs more attention? Let us know in the comments. Each unsolved case is a family still looking for answers, still wishing for the closure that finally came to the Martinez family after almost 50 years of searching.